A lot of people have not wrapped their heads around that bicycles have really only been around for the past 200 years. That is basically an infant technology. That's like 2 people ago. That is very new. Bicycles actually came around in 1817, but they didn't even have pedals back then. Essentially, a bicycle then was a running assistant. There have been a lot of weird iterations of the bicycle, and us as human beings have done some very strange things to get the technology to where it is today, to be a very, very efficient mode of transportation, to be a sport, to be one of the best forms of cardio exercise on the planet. But today, we're just gonna be talking about 4 of the things that really stick out in my head of when the technology changed, and people just, you know, our memories are short as human beings, and we kind of forget how things used to be. We did some weird stuff on bicycles. So this is a somewhat new style of video for me, so if you do enjoy it, like it, subscribe, make sure you comment as well. That definitely helps with the algorithm. Let me know what weird things you have seen with the bicycle industry and bicycles in general, being this is such a new technology in the span of global history. Let's start off light and talk about what I call the bear traps. Bear traps, or cages, or clip pedals were the precursor to the modern day clipless pedal, and a lot of people that are new to the sport have no idea that the design of the original bear trap was to make sure that you could not pull out of them at all. Let me go grab a set actually that we have from the bike shop. I will be right back. I will show you what I mean. So you would have a specifically designed shoe that would have a cleat with a channel in it. You would slide your shoe into the cage of the pedal, align that channel with your pedal, the clip on the bottom of it, I guess you'd say. Then take the strap on the pedal and just strangle the crap out of your foot like it owed you money. You should not be able to pull your foot out of this setup no matter what. This is why when you watch track cycling, they have people holding them behind before they say go, or it's a rolling start, something like that. But they are physically, because these pedals are still used today, predominantly in track cycling though, because those dudes are putting out huge watt numbers for a short period of time, and they can still pull out of the modern day clipless pedal. So those guys will still use straps. And a friend of ours named Steve. Hey Steve, I hope you're doing well. So how do you get out of these pedals when you stop, you might ask? But actually the first thing is you better freaking remember that you are attached to your bicycle with no way out. You have to start slowing down way before the stop sign or the red light. You reach down, you loosen your straps while riding so they are loose enough for you to slide your foot out before stopping. Now you might be asking, why in the heck would anyone even want to do this in the first place? Why would you want to be physically attached to your bike? And the reason is actually because you can get a full pedal stroke in, and it is much more efficient on the bike. You can pull up as well as push down. So a typical pedal stroke, come over the top, push down real hard, scrape the bottom of the ice cream barrel, pull back up. Then you start over again. It's basically like that. That is an efficient pedal stroke. Well, if you don't have cages or you aren't clipped into your bike, you're only gonna be able to push down. If you're riding with someone who is on flat pedals versus somebody that has clipless, that person is gonna be able to work all their muscle groups and go farther, faster. My modern day clipless pedal, that is where you simply press down on the pedal to get into it, and then you turn your heel to the outside to disengage the pedal. This results in you being able to get the full rotation benefit, but without actually having to like reach down and unstrap, and you can get out of them much quicker. It's much safer to run this way just because it's hands-free disengagement. You know, you're sitting there and now you're out of your pedal. The next one that I want to talk about is how real men used to race the Tour de France. We're talking about pre-1937 Tour de France's. The original cyclists to conquer the Tour de France before 1937 were all on bikes that had a single gear, oftentimes fixed, and wooden rims. The fixed gear part was what made this even more interesting. Many of us are used to being able to freewheel. This is all thanks to the ratchet-like machine that is inside your rear hub that allows you to not pedal when descending. Imagine competing in one of the hardest endurance events in the world, and your rig is not able to freewheel going downhill. In the early 1900s, when the freewheel was starting to get kind of popular, it was still mechanically a fixed gear bicycle is one of the most sound machines you can ever ride. There's almost nothing that can go wrong except for your chain and maybe a flat tire. That's why when the freewheel first came out, half of the people were like, I don't know, I'm not using that because I don't want my bike to break. in this extremely huge event where there's no support. You have to remember that there were no teams back then. Everybody had to do their own mechanicking repairs. Inevitably, the freewheel did win out because of descending without a freewheel. That's sketchy. I haven't descended a long one before, but I have went downhill, and you basically just take your feet off the pedals and hope for the best. But that's your brakes as well, so you better know where you're going because you need to put your feet back on the pedal and try your hardest to pedal backwards to slow the bike. There weren't brakes on these things, and they weighed 40 pounds. 40 pounds is heavy for a freaking mountain bike now. Now, road bikes are 15 pounds, and that's the limit. I would almost liken the original tour to like modern day gravel races. You were not allowed to have mechanical support, so you set your rig up to withstand the brutality of the landscape. And if your freaking frame broke, tough luck. You were walking to the next town and borrowing a welder. Like, seriously, that actually happened. One of the guys that was crushing in the tour, I will post his name when I find it, because I just remember the story. But he was descending and his fork sheared off like completely. He like ate crap, end over end, crashed, whatever. He had to walk like 15 kilometers to the next town. He found a blacksmith. They are not allowed to interfere, but he can instruct him. So the blacksmith stood behind this guy while he literally sat there, freaking hammered his frame back together, welded it back together, got on his bike. He still finished like top 5 or something like that. He didn't win, it cost him the win, but this freaking dude welded his bike back together in the tour. Now a team car pulls up behind you and throws you an entirely new bike if you get a flat tire, much less your frame breaks. Side note, the first gears in the tour were actually just multiple cogs in the rear end, and to change them you would physically get off of your bike, move the chain, retension the chain, and then proceed on your jolly way. They had horizontal dropouts so you could take up the slack. I found that pretty interesting, and the rear derailleur finally won out and was allowed to be used 10 years after its inception in 1937. Speaking of derailleurs, let's talk about how we used to shift. So we've already talked about how our hands were the first derailleur. Let's move on to one of my favorite and earliest iterations. This was essentially the precursor to the modern day derailleur that we all know and love. This was before we had cables. So you essentially had these two really long levers on the seat stay of your bike. One lever literally operates the quick release of your rear wheel. So if you reached behind yourself, flick that lever while riding, it would disengage your rear wheel from your bicycle while riding. The bike would have sliding dropouts, and with the big quick release lever, you would literally loosen your wheel. Then with the second lever, you would pick up the chain and slide it to a different cog. Set that lever back, the chain slack would automatically be taken up because of the sliding dropouts, and then you would close the quick release lever to complete the shift. It took me a minute to like wrap my head around about how crazy that is for riding. So you're riding down the road, you're pedaling along, you unhook your rear wheel, and if anybody of you guys have ever had a quick release come loose on you, I've only had it happen to me once. It was test riding a bike. That thing is not stable, so you better be like clenching your top tube or something. Horizontal dropouts, flip that lever, your rear wheel can now slide forward and backwards, but the chain's kind of keeping it taut. You have another lever where instead of clicking and the cable pulling it, you reach back there and you pick up the chain with this other lever, move it to another cog, set it down, it'll automatically adjust, the chain tension will, then you close your rear wheel off and you go on your jolly way. That sounds insane to me. I've never seen one of these bikes in person. I would love to ride one just to see how dangerous it is. I gotta speak completely transparent. In the span of around 20 years, there was about 750 different patents for different styles of shifting, but most people were satisfied with the simplicity of their single speeds. So that still doesn't make it any less interesting that these bikes were actually ridden, but I do believe that these were like your stepping stones. This style of shifting wasn't around for very long before they came up with a better idea. Mountain biking is newer than computers, than a lot of things, and it still blows my mind because mountain biking has been around. I was born in 1990. Mountain biking has always been around, and it's hard as a human sometimes to wrap your head around something not being there. I almost feel like mountain biking should have been invented in like 1900. No, it was. I'm gonna say mountain biking proper was invented in the 80s. Forefathers of mountain biking were definitely 70s though. Those guys were awesome, in my opinion. The first iteration of the mountain bike was called a clunker and wasn't really ridden, like I said, until the mid-70s. Before that, there wasn't mountain biking. There were just these outlaw hippies that would literally take beach cruisers, modify them, and then go ripping down hills. With the first mountain bike race being called the repack race, because a lot of these bikes had coaster brakes. That's the brakes where you pedal backwards. And by the time you would get to the bottom of the hill, your hub would be smoking so bad from using your brakes so much, you would have to repack them after every race. So that's where it got called Repack Ridge or the repack race. To me, this is some of what the local mountain bike scene has actually lost, that sense of adventure and doing the unknown and experimentation. The bikes have continued to evolve, and eventually we had some of our first downhill races. So these were people like, you know, Gary Fisher, Tom Ritchie, Mike Signard was kind of involved, but that's a completely different story I'd love to get into. Joe Breeze, they made some of the first true mountain bikes, and when they started coming out with mountain bikes, they were selling like hotcakes, but they were literally just like guys in their garage welding frames together to be specifically for mountain biking. But there were no mountain bike trails back then, right? So they would go on like, I guess, just off-roading trails, logging roads, gravel roads, that kind of stuff. Not what we're really used to, the cross-country scene nowadays, but it's still, you know, no helmets, no proper seat height, whatever. Just run what you brung, see who can get down this thing the fastest with some of the crummiest equipment, not designed for this whatsoever. These guys were awesome. Bikes continued to evolve, and eventually we had some of the first downhill races, especially the ones of the early 90s. They were intense. Most people nowadays are used to 150 millimeters of travel, front and rear, with 2.5 tires. Or if you're talking about downhill bikes, it's over 200 millimeters of travel with huge tires. Back then, 80 millimeters of travel was unheard of, and there was not really full suspensions, and tires were super narrow. I've often told people that trails really haven't gotten easier. Technology has just gotten that much better. So these guys would literally take bicycles and do gnarly downhills with some of the weirdest experimentations in cycling history. Nobody knew how to be a downhill racer. It's like playing a video game for the very first time. There wasn't anybody that did it beforehand, so you don't have a guide. You're just throwing yourself out there and hope for the best, right? That is why I think from like the 70s to the 90s early 90s was some of the craziest times in mountain biking. If you've ever wanted to spice up your local trail, just grab a late 90s mountain bike and see how easy the trail is on old tech. Now, mountain biking and cycling in general is so scientific. We know exactly what power we have to output for exactly how long before we bonk, and exactly what PSI you have to run in your tire so it doesn't roll off the rim, but you get maximum grip. And I really miss that sense of experimentation that was around with these early rigs. It's almost ludicrous to think of doing a race like ORAM with a 26-inch wheel, no suspension, and skinny tires. It really does make me think that we've gotten a little soft in the past 20 years or so. If you want me to do a longer video on any of these subjects, leave me a comment below. These are definitely some of the craziest iterations of cycling, but there are, to me, right, these are the stories that stick out in my brain. There's gazillion. If you guys have any that you'd like me to cover in the future, give me some ideas down below. Let me know. That's what I got for you. I hope it was entertaining. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.